Sorry, that's going to really bug me, but I'll keep it there. Okay, so we're going to be looking at, once again, early empire, Republican and then early empire artwork. And we're going to be focusing on realism, of course. Okay, so the first image that we have today is where we left off yesterday. And this is the head of a Roman patrician. So this tells us about his social status. Remember that the Republic had two classes of people, or basically two classes of people, the patricians and the plebeians, right? So the patricians were the wealthy elite who basically held all the power, right? So this one tells you it's Republican Roman, right? And it's made out of marble, right? So from yesterday, right, we had mentioned, we were looking at some of these images. We were talking about how the Romans really revered age and wisdom, right? They valued what they learned from the Greeks, but in the society, it was a little bit different. So we see these older figures, but do you guys remember as well what the function of these things were? Why would they make images of older statesmen or older people? Nicole? Right, it's a memorial. It shows your ancestry. It helps you know where you came from, right? It's basically like your family tree, right? So I am great, I am worthy because my father was this guy and he was great and worthy, right? It gives you your social status, your wealth. So this has what we call verism. And so this would be a vocabulary term that you would want to know for early works from Rome, so Republican works. It's a term we call veristic. We use this term veristic for the work of like Salvador Dali. It's like hyper realistic and like over the top. So veristic is this super exaggerated realism, right? And so I like to say warts and all. If, you know, where the Greeks were making everything look perfect, the Romans are going to show you everything and maybe even exaggerate it. So what do I mean by exaggerated? How is his age exaggerated? What do you think? Yeah. Right? He's got a lot of forehead wrinkles. He's got neck wrinkles. He's got cheek wrinkles. I mean, as you get older, you tend to have like saggy jowls, right? And you can see the fleshiness like around his laugh line. But like he has a lot of extra skin in his cheeks. And there's like wrinkles that you don't normally see with people like that many, even at severe age. It's normally like gravity pulls it down. So he has a lot of extra wrinkles and very saggy skin. And so that makes him look even older than he might have been. So it makes him look more wise, right? That's like the function of it. It makes him seem more distinguished. Right? So we already sort of talked about the function of it, but let's kind of understand a little bit about why he has that expression on his face, right? What was happening at the end of the Republic and before we start to call it the Empire? Does anyone know what was happening in the government in Rome from the switch to Republic to Empire? What do you think ever happens when there's a switch in power? Kalani?
Wasn't there like a bunch of different leaders kind of fighting it out and gathering their own armies and basically trying to outdo each other?
Exactly. And so he was kind of worried about the end of the Republic. You know, the point of the Republic is so that they could have a series of people kind of ruling the government, and people like Julius Caesar, right? He wanted to be the ultimate ruler. And other people were vying for power as well. So it was a very tumultuous period, right, in the history of ancient Rome. Of course, the fear of the unknown. What would happen if we had a centralized power? So we talked about the function before. I think there's a couple extra things here. So this idea of gravitas and virtue, this idea that it embodies the essence of that as well. Okay, so the Smart History video goes through and shows you a bunch of different examples, and then it also has this one. There's other examples here too. You can see this one of another governmental official, very realistic. He really does kind of look like a real person, right? Compared to an idealized person that we might have seen in Greek times. Okay, so the next area that we're going to move on to for realism is the city of Pompeii. And so we've all heard wonderful stories about Pompeii because it's probably the best preserved ancient Roman city because of the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. So it really wasn't that important of a city, right? It was very typical of an empire city of its day. It is almost like a country retreat that some people who lived in the city of Rome might have had a second house in. And then there are some people who lived there kind of like full time. And so it had a lot of very stereotypical things that any ancient Roman city would have. So you can see that it has orthogonal grid plan format. So it was very organized. The Romans loved to organize. So it had avenues, it had cross streets in rectangles, like it has a grid format, okay? It would also have things to keep people happy. When we look at the Colosseum, we're going to talk a lot about the construction projects of the ancient Romans. And so when you look at the bottom here, what is this stuff? What do you think this stuff is? What might you do in these places here? How about this one? Talk amongst yourselves. What would you do at the bottom of this photo? You're hanging out in Pompeii. Okay, what would you do? What would you be doing down here? Yeah. Right. This is a Colosseum, right? It's not like the Colosseum necessarily in Rome, right? This shows that this is a little bit more of a modest Colosseum, but this would have had sporting events, maybe concerts, theater, and people would sit in the seats and watch the spectators, they'd be spectators. And then here would might be exercise fields. So the Romans really loved to have things that would keep people entertained and happy and fit, right? As well as educated. A lot of these outdoor sports places also had, baths, and they have special rooms to learn stuff as well. So like not necessarily schools, but ways to better yourself. Okay. So the streets of Pompeii give us a really good indication of what things were like. They were typically cobblestone, but they often would have gutters and irrigation. Sometimes the cross streets to slow down traffic would have like speed bumps, but instead of speed bumps, you'd have to put your chariot or wagon wheels through those grooves. So that tells you that there'd have to be a little bit of standardization, right? You'd have to have carts that were certain width to them in order for the wheels to be able to go through these grooves. So they were very organized that way. This would have had different shop fronts. And in Pompeii, as well as in many different other cities, you had different forms of housing. So one of the most common kinds of housing in the big cities like Rome were insulas. Insulas were basically apartment buildings, okay? Basically apartment buildings. So in the base of a insula or a domus, which we'll see in a second, you would have stores at the bottom. So at the very bottom, you'd have stores. Notice the big windows. It looks like downtown Naperville, right? Big windows. And then sometimes people live above those stores, don't they? In downtown Naperville? Yeah. And so just like here, the nicer houses were close to the ground. And then the smaller and small, as you go higher and higher, the apartments get smaller and smaller. And that's a little different than normal. We like to think about like penthouses being the nicest one on the top. But of course, in ancient times, things like fire, you would be scared about that. So you would want to get out first. So typically the wealthy people who own the businesses live above their businesses and then would rent out the structure to the rest of everyone. This is on the outskirts. This is an image from Ostia, which is on the outskirts of Rome today. If you're going to the beach, you kind of go through this place. So another common form of housing is a domus. A domus or a house is not too different than how the ancient Egyptians lived. They would have a house with like a garden attached. There's an image of that in our textbook. But another thing that's important to know about this is that this structure is actually very similar to church construction, with having like courtyards in front of a house, or even mosque construction, which is done in a similar way. You would have like a courtyard, you'd have an open space, and then you would have an interior space. And so we will see how the Christians and the Muslims adapted kind of housing construction for a religious setting. Because of course, with early Christianity and Islam, a lot of early ceremonies took place in people's houses rather than in the public. Okay, so these are the different parts, and we'll look at this here. This is kind of like a deconstructed house for us. But we'll look at the one for the house of Vettii at Pompeii. This is from Imperial Rome, so this is after the time of Augustus. This one dates from about 62 to 79 CE. So we've moved out of B.C.E. and we're now in CE. And it's made out of stone, and the paintings inside of it are made out of fresco. So we'll talk about the fresco paintings later. Right now, we're just going to focus on the domus, the house. Okay, so the function of this would be personal house for two brothers, Aulus Vidius Convia and his brother Aulus Vidius Restivius. I don't even know how to say that, right? So this was where they lived. It was also their place of business, right? This was their place of business. So typically by the entryways into a house, so you can see there's a door here. That's where the businesses were. The businesses were in the front of the house, okay? And the deals were often made in the atrium. So the atrium is a little pond area as well. So they typically had skylights. So the ponds let rainwater come in. And so it'd be almost like a backyard or like doing deals on the deck of your house, right? It would be a very nice location. And so just a little context, which we've talked about before, is that Pompeii was a typical ancient city. It was known for its market, as well as Pompeii is really close to Naples, right? So Naples would have been important because it has a bay, and so it would be good for transporting goods and services for ancient Rome, right? Importing, exporting to other distant lands. Now, these two brothers were businessmen, basically. They started as slaves. So they started as slaves, and they were then liberated and allowed to become freedmen. So they became very wealthy businessmen. And so in order to kind of show off their wealth, they together built this very elaborate villa or house in Pompeii. And so one of the things that they talk about is they incorporated strong boxes. So they had their wealth kind of held inside their house, which was not typical. And one of the reasons for that was to show off their wealth, because they did not come from one of those patrician families where their family was always prosperous. right? They earn their wealth, they earn their freedom. So their house is a little bit different in organization. The typical domus is more like axial and much more like symmetrical, and their house is a little bit more asymmetrical. It's kind of based on how it was built on a corner as well. And you can actually see that here in this contextual image that I've included. So that's what it looks like from the outside. Okay, so domus architecture was based on the works of Vitruvius. Vitruvius was a Roman thinker who wrote a lot about the balance and order of architecture, and then this was also translated into the human form. You're probably aware of the Vitruvian Man by Leonardo, right? By Leonardo. And so a lot of the layout is based on this concept of perfect balance and order, okay? And so Vitruvius was writing about it. And of course, a lot of this comes from their knowledge, their awareness, and their love of ancient Greece, right? So they're learning, they're adapting from what they know from the Greeks for their own houses. Okay, so here are some of the parts. You have a plan, right? You have a plan. This one on the left side is kind of like the typical domus. Notice how I said that it's normally very symmetrical. Ours is asymmetrical. So what I am trying to do is to talk about the most important parts of the structure. And because I never know what they're going to ask you about when it comes to the plan. So this one has two entryways from the street. So I've circled them in red. So there's a doorway here and a doorway here because it was on a corner, right? This one was on a corner. It had two atriums, which is also not very typical. Typical, you have one, but maybe it was because there's two brothers. I don't know, right? So there's an atrium here and an atrium here. Remember that atriums were also used in business, right? They were kind of like these outdoor-like settings with a pond, and they would let the wind in, and it would be light from the sunlight. And so it'd be a great place to entertain, right? It also, right here on the left, has a peristyle court. A peristyle court is kind of like the atrium. It's a garden inside the house. It too would have an open area that will allow the sunlight and the rain to come in, and you have plants, and you have chairs and benches. And so they often use these things for outdoor seating and dining. So you can imagine, like, if you went to a fancy dinner and it was outside on someone's balcony or on someone's deck, it's similar to that, right? I don't, it's probably in another slide. Let's see. Where is it? Maybe my animation didn't translate from PowerPoint to Google. So it has a tricilium, which is the dining hall. And for the life of me, I can't remember. I think it's this one right here. I think that is where the mural paintings are that we're going to look at. And so that would be a dining hall. And then it has bedrooms and a kitchen. And typically the bedrooms were near the peristyle or the atrium because the fresh air would be good for sleeping. And the kitchens typically were in the back because of fires. Right, so kitchens were normally in the back because of fires. So here we have the atrium. You have a picture, right? I think in the image set of an atrium. Am I right? Yes. So this is the image that you have. And so this is the atrium right here, the bigger one. So this would be like a retention pond. You can see the skylight coming through. One of the things that you probably notice is that some of these columns and walls would be decorated. So they would put fresco paintings here. They might have beautiful mosaics as well. So these, they had two of them, so it really does show off their wealth. Now this is the peristyle court, and you don't have this in the image set. This one is in our textbook. Now this, you can see, has basically a water feature, it has a garden, it has sculptures. You can see peristyle, right, with the columns around it. You can see that there's murals on the walls. This one might be a little over the top, have extra furniture, probably from other structures. But you can see how it would be a really great place to entertain people underneath the balconies or inside this area, right? And then we have a corner of a mural in a room. So this is made out of fresco. So what fresco is it's painting on wet plaster. So it's painting on wet plaster. Has anyone ever done a plaster print of like their hand or their feet when they were little kids, right? Plaster, when it starts to dry, there's a chemical reaction, it gets hot, right? And so that locks the pigment in. And so it's actually one of the reasons why they're really well preserved. Fresco is a great way because it permanently locks the pigment onto the walls because of that chemical reaction. So the construction is made out of stone, the painting is all fresco. So there are 4 different styles of Roman painting. And the foundation of these is based on Illusionism. So our theme for today is all about realism. Illusionism is a technique where artists really try to make things look real, right? It's a realism, but the truth is it's really a great way of showing visual depth and space. It's creating like an optical illusion that something is there, even though it's painted on the wall. And so there are 4 different styles of Roman painting. Our style is just one of these 4, but I thought it would be nice to see the different examples of it. So all 4 of these styles are really based on the principle of making something look real. Okay, making something look real. So the first one is called masonry style. And so this wall looks like it's made out of stone, but that's all faux painting. So sometimes where people would like faux marble something, make it look like it was marble, right? That's basically what they did, is they would paint it and add striations, and they would make it look speckled, and they'd make it look like it was blocks of different colors of marble, but really it's just paint on a wall, right? And so it looks like different blocks. It also sometimes has like borders. Some of this border imagery is fake too. It's like fake architectural elements. This thing looks pretty real to me, right? But these columns on the sides could be fake painting, right? So fake architectural elements. So it'd be like fake columns, right? Oh, look at a fake pilaster. The second style is called illusionistic or architectural style. It too has fake architectural elements. So a squared column is called a pilaster. That capital is painted on the wall. So this whole surface is flat, okay? And then in between those pilasters, it's almost like it's a peristyle hall. It's like looking out a window. And there we have atmospheric perspective. Atmospheric perspective is something that Leonardo da Vinci was really good at. Notice how the details in the foreground are kind of bright, but notice how colors get duller and lighter and more gray as they go into the distance. It's a way of creating visual depth, right? So the Romans were really good at this. And of course, there wasn't too many examples of this until they discovered Herculaneum and Pompeii. There's only a few examples of illusionistic painting in like Livia's palace or in ancient Rome. The third style is kind of over the top. It's called ornate or ornamental. It too had fake architecture. It had extensions of architectural space. So it almost looks like buildings, right? Buildings. It often had walls that kind of dissolved as if you were looking out into the world. And it would also have really elaborate decoration. So these strange looking things here are easels holding up paintings. And then it would also have things that look like frames with paintings hanging on the wall. So the paintings were actually on the wall. They were painted on the wall, not hanging on the wall. Okay, so all of this would be a smooth, flat wall, and it's all illusionistic. It's all faux. So this one has a lot of detail. And then the last style is called intricate. It's a combination of all of them. It has fake architectural imagery. When you look at it, it has columns and pilasters. At the very base, that faux marble is called dado. It has medallions that are round. It has rectangular sections. It looks like it's inset marble, but it's all fake. Okay. It has walls that dissolve. It has faux paintings hanging on the wall, right? It's got elaborate detail. Okay. So our image has dado, right? It has windows with architecture that looks like it's going through the windows. It's got paintings on the wall. It's got fake architectural elements. What style do you think House of Vettii frescoes are in? Are they in 1, 2, 3, or 4? What do you think? Trip. 4. Definitely. They're in our intricate style, right? So it has like these little windows where you kind of like look outside, and it sort of looks like we're seeing more buildings, but really we're just seeing walls. Okay, this painting is in, oh, I had it the wrong place. There we go. Is in the tricilium. It is in the dining hall. Bless you. It's in the dining hall. And so this is a 3-sided room off of the peristyle court. And this probably housed a bunch of those reclining, right, chairs where they would eat and feast for hours. Right? And you get the breeze from the peristyle court inside. Now, when it comes to the content of the painting, there are several different murals, and there are several different resources about what the themes are based on. Okay, this is based on the it's often called the Pentheus room, which recounts the cycle of stories about ancient Thebes, right? And it talks about this Greek hero named Pentheus, right? So there are these different images that are all about his life cycle, okay? One of the major things about him is that he opposed the cult of Bacchus and was torn to pieces by women, including his own mother, who is shown in one of the images as pulling his hair. And so the cult of Bacchus was a very popular one. That's like, you know, the god of wine and joy and so on. So since he was like brutally attacked in the story, right? So Bacchus is the Roman god that is the equivalent to Dionysus in Greek mythology. Remember, they just take the gods and rename them. Now, I don't necessarily think you have to write down every bit of this. You can always go back to it. But I just want to make sure you knew that a lot of the stories were based on this Greek hero. Oh. Also, some people believe that this image here, right, is the infant Hercules strangling the snakes. So you can see that depiction there. So here we have kind of like the different cast of characters, right? So that would be this painting right here. One of the things that you probably noticed is the illusionism. Now, we have like this image right here, and I don't know if they're going to ask you about this in particular, but keep in mind that it has all of these characteristics, okay? It has the imitation of marble, right? This is fake marble, right? It's got atmospheric perspective. Notice outside here how the columns get hazier and lighter as they go into the distance, okay? The Romans did not paint in true linear perspective. Their point of view is a little strange. It's more what we call intuitive perspective. Things tend to go back into space on diagonals, so it becomes more believable. They see it rather than use a mathematical formula in order to do that, right? They also use a light source. Notice how the light is shining in on the upper left side, so that the left side is in light and the right side is in shadow. That makes it seem more realistic as well. And then their style is a lot less formal than Egyptians. Notice that they create a lot of overlapping space, right? Figures are in front of other figures. Figures are in front of architecture to create a believable sense of space. Okay, this is in Livia's palace. This is in, so this is Augustus's wife, right? This was her palace. And here's a beautiful image of her garden. It has birds flying in and all kinds of fruit trees. This is from Herculaneum. This is a reconstructed room in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, where you can see a typical bedroom scene. So the floors were often in mosaic, and then it have those illusionistic walls. It has a color on the top that we often call Pompeian red, right? And then in the walls, you can see that the walls kind of dissolve, and you have these architectural elements kind of breaking it up, and then you just see more and more buildings. This is a great example of intuitive perspective. Notice how the angles go back in diagonal, but they don't all converge to a true vanishing point. If all of these arrows went to one spot, we call it linear perspective. But they did not invent that or discover that until the time of the Renaissance with Brunelleschi. So not until about the 1400s. So they're basically just doing it in their head, trying to make it look realistic. Okay. Some other examples of illusionistic painting. So this is almost linear perspective. At least all the vanishing points go into the center, right? Now, the last piece that we have for today is our Alexander mosaic. This comes from a different villa in ancient Pompeii. This is from the house of Faun. Now, we have discussed this already in terms of it being a Greek painting, but let's talk about it in terms of being a Roman mosaic. This actually dates from Republican times. So this is going back in time a little bit. It's from 100 BCE. Okay. Does anyone know if this would be on the wall or on the floor? Where were mosaics placed? Most of the time, the floor. Occasionally, they would put them on the walls, but 99% of the time, they would be on the floor, right? So in a museum, you see it on a wall, okay? They don't want you stepping on it, stepping around it. So now when you go see it, it's on a wall. But here you get a sense of the scale of it. It's very large, okay? So it was originally a painting, right? And the very top of it was left kind of empty, okay? And so we already talked about this. So let's just do a review. What is it an image of? Talking about content. What's it an image of? Where does this come from? And
It was Darius's victory against Alexander the Great in the Battle of, I think it's like.
yes. So it is from the Battle of Issus with Alexander and Darius. And so it's that moment of the retreat. So it's a very climactic moment. So it's a Greek story, not a Roman story, right? It's a Greek story. And it's a very climactic point in the story, right? Why would the Romans have a recreation of a Greek painting in their home? Why would a Roman have something Greek in their home? Go ahead.
Maybe because the Romans had like so much inspiration from the Greeks, so they like would enjoy the art even in their leisure.
Right. They were obsessed with Greek culture. That's why they adopted so much of it, right? So it was a great way of showing off their wealth, great way of making you look super smart, right? That you were aware of ancient Greek history or ancient Greek like books, poetry, philosophers, anything Greek what they were excited about, right? It would link them to another great power, right? Link themselves to the great power. And it really does show their obsession with ancient Greek art. Okay, this is made in Mosaic. So this one in particular is made out of itty bitty little squares of stone, little pieces of marble. And so they would arrange it according to color in order to create the illusion that it is three-dimensional. You can watch the process if you're really interested here. Each little tile is called a tesseract. Now we will see mosaics again when we look at Byzantine art. They were often made out of glass or gold, so they shimmer, right? So you can see how intricate the details are, especially on Alexander. Look at the little portrait on his armor, right? So all this illusionism is made with those little cubes of stone, and they have a lot of characteristics to the illusionistic painting. They have realistic posing, the rendering of value, the reflection in metal, that likeness, it really does look like Alexander, and it also has atmospheric perspective. Things do get a little lighter and hazier as it moves into the distance. Oh, okay, I have animations. Totally forget. So this is some more, this is like still life, fresco, another mosaic. This is a wall painting for ancient Rome. She's writing, so she's got her pen up on her lip. This would be made out of wax. They would practice what they were going to write before they would waste paper because paper was expensive. And then this is an ancient Egypt. This is the Egyptian painting of a Roman, because of course the Romans conquered Egypt, right? And so this was typical on sarcophagi, to put a likeness of the person on their sarcophagus, right? So we'll stop there for today. So for tomorrow, I know several of you are not going to be here. Please make sure that you do the work for your research assignment so that I can help you with whatever you need.